Check this out. BCM Raider here, bringing you another Commander deck tech. Today we're looking at Orvar the All Form. This is a mono blue control deck, but we're going to use Orvar's ability of whenever we cast an instant or sorcery that targets any one of our permanents, we get a copy. So we're going to be casting a lot of instants and sorceries that target to do crazy dumb things. So let's get right into it. First up, we're going to look at the instants. So first up, we have Snap. This will return a target creature back to its owner's hand, and we untap 2 lands. Now we have 4 very specific instants that we're going to use to protect Orvar as much as possible, or target another creature. So we have Teferi's Time Twist. This will exile a target permanent. So we'll get the copy, and we will have that permanent return to the battlefield at the beginning of the next end step. But if that permanent was a creature, it will enter with a +1 counter on it. Now we have Essence Flux. This will blink out a creature. It will target, and if it's a spirit, it'll get a +1 counter. Luckily, Orvar is all creature types, so it's a spirit. Now we have Slip Out the Back. This will phase out the creature, but it will put a +1 counter on it. Now we have Ghostly Flicker. This one is actually very powerful because you get 2 separate targets, whether it be a artifact, a creature, or a land. This also pairs very well with Archaeomancer. Okay, now we have a couple different target spells that we're not going to really worry about too much what they do, just as long as those spell target, and they will draw us cards. So we have Thermal Flux, Twisted Image. A fun use with Twisted Image, if a creature's power is 0 and you switch its power with its toughness, that creature will end up going to the graveyard because its toughness will become 0. Now we have Enervate. Enervate will tap down a artifact, creature, or land. Now we have Shimmering Mirage. All this does is it changes a land's type to a different land type. So what we could actually do with this is we could target a colorless land that we control, and we can have it become an island if we really need it to. Okay, now we have Glamour Die. Glamour Die is going to be really cool because we can target a bunch of different things, but all we have to do is discard a land, and we can recast this from our graveyard, and that's going to be very beneficial. Okay, now we have 4 very powerful instants that we're going to use to target things over and over and over because they have the buyback mechanic. Also, if the spell has buyback, if we have a cost reduction and we get the buyback to either 1 or 0 mana, we're going to keep recasting these spells over and over. So first up is Whims of Volrath. This is a 1-cost buyback spell for 2. But if we reduce that cost by 2, all we have to do is pay 1 mana and constantly keep replaying this card. Now we have Mind Games. This might actually become useful because we can tap down a artifact, creature, or land. So we can tap down our opponent's creatures, artifacts, or lands during their upkeep and really slow them down. Now we have Clock Spinning. Clock Spinning is a really interesting card because this will remove counters. such as planeswalkers. You can actually kill planeswalkers with this card by removing their loyalty counters. Now we have Capsize. Capsize is probably the most toxic buyback spell that we're playing, but we don't care about that. Okay, we are running one singular planeswalker, and that is Narset, Parter of Veils. She's only here to control our opponents from drawing multiple cards that could potentially stop what we're doing. But the legend rule still applies. So now we have a couple enchantments. These enchantments are very powerful. So we have Vesuvan Duplimancy. This is going to trigger whenever we cast a spell that targets either a artifact or a creature. And within that, it'll create another token copy, except that token copy is not legendary. Now we have Propaganda. This is to prevent our opponents from attacking us. And if we're going to make a lot of copies of Propaganda, your opponents aren't going to attack you almost ever. And of course, we're focused on card draw, so we have Rhystic Study and Mystic Remora. What's going to be really, really funny is when we start making multiple copies of Rhystic Study or Mystic Remora, then your opponents really can't cast anything without you drawing cards. Okay, now we have some artifacts. Of course, we're playing Sol Ring. Sapphire Medallion. This one is going to be very powerful because this is going to be our main cost reduction that we're going to want to make many copies of. Because the more copies of Sapphire Medallion we make, the less all our spells cost. Now, to produce even more mana, we have Gilded Lotus. Basically, all these permanents are going to benefit by having multiple copies being made of them. Such as Coveted Jewel. For 6 mana, I know that sounds like a lot, but when it enters, we draw 3 cards. We're going to be drawing so many cards and adding 3 mana that it's probably not even going to matter. Okay, now we have Thought Vessel. That way we can keep all the cards we're drawing in our hand. Now we have Elixir of Immortality. Making multiple copies of this card is going to be very powerful because we can just pay 2 and gain 5 life. And we're going to keep shuffling our graveyard back in and keep recasting all these spells. And that's a good time. Okay, now we have some sorceries. We have Energy Tap. We have Aquatuck's Will. We're going to actually draw a card with this because Orvar is a merfolk. Now we have Trait Doctoring. This is going to be very powerful because it has the cipher. So whenever we deal combat damage with the ciphered creature, we get to cast this spell again. Most of the time, I cipher this on Orvar. That way I'm dealing combat damage and I'm casting even more spells. Similar to that, we have Hidden Strings. This is going to be fun because we can tap and untap something, but also this will have another target. So this will actually target twice. Okay, now we have a very large draw spell with Flow of Ideas. We're going to draw a card for each island we control. So if we're going to make token copies of islands, why not draw a lot of cards with that? Now we have Time Warp because we're going to want to take extra turns. And to deal with our opponent's creatures, we have Whelming Wave. This is going to return everything that's not a Kraken, Leviathan, Octopus, or Serpent. And luckily, Orvar is all those things. And because we're playing Narset Pardo Veils, we are playing Windfall. Okay, let's get into the creatures that we're going to target. Of course, first up is Spark Double. If it happens to be a legendary creature, we're going to want Spark Double to enter the battlefield as a copy of that legendary creature, because it will enter as a non-legendary, so we wouldn't have to sacrifice it. And if we control the non-legendary version of whatever it is we want to make lots of copies of, all we have to do is do this first, and then we can target the Spark Double that's not legendary and get multiple copies of that creature. Similar to that, we have Clever Impersonator, but the only difference is Clever Impersonator can copy any non-land permanent. Now we have Pirated Copy. What's going to make this a little bit better is the fact that we're going to be able to draw cards whenever those creatures deal combat damage. Okay, now we have a very powerful one with the Reality Chip. All we have to do is reconfigure this onto Orvar, and then we can basically play our entire deck from the top of our library. And that's going to be insane. Okay, now we have a very powerful one with Displacer Kitten. We're going to have a lot of fun with this card, because we're playing a lot of instants and sorceries that are going to target things. So we're going to trigger Orvar, getting lots of copies of things, but also Displacer Kitten is going to allow it to blink out whatever non-land permanent we targeted. So if it has a very powerful enter the battlefield effect, we're going to trigger that many times. Such as Aether Chandler. Just when this guy enters, we get the choice of making a 1/1 flying bird token that we can use to block. We can return a non-land permanent to its owner's hand, whether we control it or it's our opponent's permanent. Or we can just draw a card. Another one is Glenelender Archmage. This is going to be a sitting counterspell that we're going to make a lot of copies of. But probably the best one to blink out all the time is Archaeomancer. Because if we have Displacer Kitten along with Archaeomancer, we're just going to keep returning these very powerful instants and sorceries back to our hand. Or we can use Solemn Simulacrum to go get all the lands out of our deck. Or Muldrifter. That way we can draw 2 cards. Also, we have Cloud of Fairies. We can keep making copies of Cloud of Fairies and untapping 2 lands. And that's going to be absolutely insane. But probably the best one to do is Peregrine Drake, because this is going to create an infinite loop. Okay, now we got Thada Adele. We're going to use this to attack our opponents and search their library for whatever artifact we want, and we're going to play it. Okay, now we have a new one with Enduring Curiosity. This creature has Flash. It's a 4/3, and whenever a creature we control deals combat damage to a player, we get to draw a card. And that's exactly what we want to be doing. And if this dies, it'll come back as an enchantment. Okay, now we have Spellseeker. Spellseeker is going to be very, very powerful for us, because most of our instants and sorceries cost 2 or less anyway. We can just keep making copies of Spellseeker to go get whatever instant and sorcery we want. Now we have Venser, Shaper Savant. This guy is going to be very good because we can either bounce a permanent or we can flash this in, and instead of countering a spell, this will return the spell off the stack back to their hand. And of course, because we're running counter spells, we have Baral, Chief of Compliance. He's also a cost reduction for instants and sorceries. Okay, now we have two very powerful creatures that can basically win the game on their own. But if we're going to make multiple copies of them, it's going to be very difficult for our opponents to deal with. So first up is Tidespout Tyrant and Hullbreaker Horror. This guy is absolutely insane. Okay, let's get into the land base. We are running 20 islands. Mystic Sanctuary. This is going to be very powerful because we're going to control lots of islands. So we're going to put an instant and sorcery that we want from our graveyard back on top. Now we have Castle Vantress. That way we can scry into whatever we want. Now we have Otawara. We can use this offensively and defensively. Now we have Ipnu Rivulet. We're going to use this to mill our opponents. But just in case that's not enough, we have Desert of the Mindful. This is just a cycling land that's a desert. And because we're drawing lots of cards, we have Reliquary Tower. Now we have Mirrored Landscape. We're going to use this to go get as many islands out of our deck as possible. And we're playing Strip Mine. That way we can blow up our opponent's land base. Now we have Cloud Post. Cloud Post is going to generate a lot of colorless mana for us. Glimmer Post. We're going to gain a lot of life with this card. Now we have Riptide Laboratory. Seeing how most of the creature types we're playing are wizards, and Orvar is all types, he's a wizard. If we need to protect some of those wizards, we can return them back to our hand. Now, to protect us even more from attacking creatures, we have Mazavith. To produce as much mana as possible, we have Nykthos, Shrine to Nyx, and Three Tree City. Three Tree City is a newer addition, but seeing how Orvar is whatever type we want, all we have to do whenever we make a copy of Three Tree City, we can just keep naming different creature types. And that was the deck tech for Orvar the Allform. I really hope you guys enjoyed this deck. This deck is really fun to play. You can do crazy, amazing things with this deck. So be sure to like, comment, subscribe, follow me on TikTok, share these videos, and I'll see you in the next one.